Hello there. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno, and I am a psychotherapist in Chicago. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. Today's episode is going to get very political. And obviously, in the past, 6 months or so, our episodes may have felt increasingly political to some. I actually had made the decision that I feel like anti-racism work is not political, that when we put it in the political realm, that actually means that we can't talk about it in psychological circles and other places where we need to be polite. And I've decided that that's bullshit. That's part of white supremacy, and I'm not doing that shit. So we are getting political today because I am scared. I am scared for the future of our democracy. And I specifically wanted to invite Jen Contarino on the program today because A, she's a friend of mine, and B, she has expertise in the realm of Donald Trump. So I guess I just want to say out loud for listeners, no one has ever complained about the liberal bend of this podcast, but I just wanted to put it on out there in the beginning that if you are a fan of Donald Trump, you will not enjoy this episode. But I am putting this out here specifically right now at the beginning of October because the election is about a month away. And I saw a statistic the other day that said that I don't remember how. So essentially, in 2016, the presidential election, the vote was split nearly 50-50 for Democrats and Republicans. But then there were 108 million people that just didn't vote. And that's not going to work this time around. So I wanted to put this episode out now and just implore you to vote. I am not going to tell you who to vote for, but if you're listening to this podcast, you know who I want you to vote for. Anyway, but if you do not know whether you're registered to vote, you can go to a trillion different places. A couple of them that I've just Googled right now are voteamerica.com, rockthevote.org, voterparticipation.org, and vote.org. So you can register to vote, check your registration status. The voting process sounds like it's really different in every state. And because we are in the midst of the COVID pandemic, it might not be straightforward. I know that a lot of places are doing mail-in voting. Some places are only doing in person. I, in Illinois, got my mail-in vote, but I'm actually going to be dropping it into a secure drop box in person just to make sure that it goes through the mail. So I just want to say that to everyone. And Jen will be mentioning a couple different resources that we'll be sharing in the show notes. But please go vote. Please, please, please go vote because literally the future of our country depends on it. So thank you so much. Now let me introduce you to today's guest. Jennifer Conterino, she, her, hers, is the founder and president of Mindful Psychology Associates and has been an Illinois licensed clinical psychologist for 16 years. She received her doctorate of psychology degree in clinical psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in 2003. In 2017, she authored a chapter for the New York Times bestselling book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 Mental Health Experts Assess a President. Her contribution entitled Trump Anxiety Disorder has led to interviews, writing, and speaking engagements related to anxiety and fear amidst the existing socio-political climate. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation with Jennifer. And honestly, I hope that this encourages you to vote one way or the other. I haven't received any hate mail yet, but I'm still open to it. So if you want to fight about it, I'm into that too. But at any rate, please enjoy my interview with Jennifer Conterino. Hello, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm good, Sarah. How are you?
I'm pretty good, I think. I just had therapy before this, so that's always good.
Oh, that is good. That's a good way to come into the session.
Right. Especially the heavy topic that we're going to be discussing today. And I'm sure I'll tell listeners when I record the intro for this, but this episode's going to be a little bit different because normally it's really, internally focused about the guest. And not that I don't want to hear about you and your life, but we're really here to talk about something a little bit more specific and honestly in service of democracy today. So anyway, why don't you introduce yourself first and tell people who you are and what you do?
So my name is Dr. Jennifer Conterino. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, And I own a group practice in Evanston, Illinois called Mindful Psychology Associates. I've been a psychologist since 2004 and primarily focusing in private practice, working with young adults, mood disorders, eating disorders, stress. And the past 3 years, I've also taken an interest and an expertise in sociopolitical stress. And more specifically, I was one of the 27 authors of the 2017 New York Times bestselling book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 mental health experts assess the president. I wrote the Trump anxiety disorder chapter. And since that time, I've been doing a lot of writing and speaking and getting the word out and based in the danger of what's going on and what we're seeing very, specifically right now in this moment in time. And using my professional background just to talk more about some of the issues and the themes that we know from mental health professionals and trying just to educate the community and our country about the danger level.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a little personal note for listeners, Jennifer and I are in a little cohort of other group practice owners that we like to call the Badass Practice Owners Group. So
Yeah.
So as soon as I was thinking about, I actually read Mary Trump's book, and that's when I reached out to you and I was like, did you read it? Can we talk about it? And I
Yes.
want to talk about it with you for listeners because there was so much in that book that was really interesting. And I'm digressing. Let's just fucking get into it. I didn't mention you can cuss here too. If you want to, you can say whatever the fuck you want.
That's great. I'll do it.
I guess let's start inward and then move outward. What drew you to writing that piece and contributing to the book?
Well, that's a great question. I think right before he got the nomination, along with the rest of the country, it was like, this isn't really happening. This is something that he just wants to be able to say who the nomination, goes to. Like, we've just in a lot of denial. And then when it happened, it was like, oh my God, something has to be done. So I started, there were some publications. Dan McAdams, who's a psychologist at Northwestern, published a piece around Donald Trump's mental health. And it got brewing in terms of in the media and a little bit, but I was like desperately searching for some colleagues who were also aligned with this. And so I found the group that was started by Dr. Bandy Lee, who is the editor of the book. And she had a conference at Yale in, I think it was early 2016, that talked about this issue. And she's a forensic psychiatrist and has a lot of, experience working in prisons and with people who are quite dangerous in their own right. And she knew the seriousness of if Donald Trump was to be elected, what might happen. So I got involved in that group. And then that conference led to the publishing of the book. And it was a simple thing. She put this call to authors for chapters to be written. I had complete imposter syndrome because some of the people in the book were like Phil Zimbardo, who is one of the most famous psychologists. He was the Stanford Prison Study psychologist. Gail Sheehy, who recently unfortunately passed away. She wrote a chapter. So I was pretty intimidated, but I just said, you know what? It's time just to speak out. And I knew I wanted to do something that was a little bit more clinically related based in what I was seeing on a regular basis with myself and my personal connections, but also clinically with my clients and how much people were really struggling to make sense of all this. So this happened early 2017. So after he was inaugurated and everything was starting, and the book came out in October of that year, was fast-tracked, and it was very well received and had a lot of media attention. And we met with some Democratic members of Congress and whatnot, but it didn't change a lot, and that was the tough part. But I'm happy that I was able to be part of this cause and just put some attention and my voice in the mix of all that.
Yeah. And were there any personal fears that were coming up for you in terms of his election and what could happen that were driving that?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a woman, I'm a white woman, but as a woman in America and a business owner, there was fears of what would happen with reproductive rights and women's rights. And I also think as therapists, like we work with a lot of people who aren't narcissistic or sociopathic. We work with their loved ones. We work with, their coworkers and their spouses and their kids and all that. So I knew the damage that could be done with his personality style and thought this is going to be a very, very tough and psychologically damaging and traumatic 4 years. and bracing myself
And
for
it
that.
has been.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
everyone who was like devastated on election night in 2016, it wasn't because we're like, oh, we lost. And I've always been a Democrat. But I think there was a real deep-seated understanding, like, this is going to be a disaster. And I think the personal, trauma was around that. And just wanting to be somebody who, is committed to social justice issues, is committed to helping people, is also committed to like safety. I mean, we need safety, and we know now what the impact is of having a leader that does not promote safety, that promotes division.
Right. And violence.
And violence and trauma, and has contributed directly to deaths.
Right. Right. It's funny because I was thinking as you were talking, like, you were like, oh, I'm a Democrat. Like, he's not a politician. So it's not political in that way because he doesn't even belong in this arena. And that's the part that I think is so dangerous, and my fear too, not just for what's happening right now, but for the future. If we as a country move to electing celebrities instead of people who actually are qualified for the job, we're going to continue to fuck ourselves in the ass.
Yeah. And, he's a showman, and he
Mm-hmm.
is a huckster and a liar and a con man and all that. And a lot of Americans, when he was elected, said, well, we'll give him a chance to be presidential. And most of us were like,
Right.
there's no way.
Like, it's
This
right.
this isn't going to switch. There's not going to be a switch that's turned that automatically, when he was inaugurated, that he would change his ways. We knew that deep down, most of us. And yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I do want to say too, before we get too much further into what is going on with him and all of that sort of stuff, is we are told as therapists that we shouldn't be diagnosing people that we are not treating. And yet, when it comes to public safety, I'm imagining that's a little bit different. So I'm just curious how you reconcile that for yourself and how you frame that in the light of, we are going to be talking about his disorder and he's never been on our couch before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you may be indirectly or directly referencing, which is called the Goldwater Rule, which was developed in the 1960s. Barry Goldwater was a presidential candidate, and apparently some mental health professionals came out with some piece written about him that was psychoanalytic in nature and based in hypothesizing and trying to understand some of his internal world. And the American Psychiatrists came out as like, that's not okay. We're not allowing our members to do that because of just what you said, that we don't diagnose people that we don't directly treat and work with. So for me, a couple of thoughts. One, like, I don't care about the diagnosis per se. I think what we're, in our group has focused on is the dangerousness. Like, the diagnosis is irrelevant, right? So there's that part of it. And then second part, I just should own that, I'm a group practice owner. I don't work for somebody or for an organization or company that could censor me or have some problems with what I say. So I felt like that is a privilege that I should use to be able to use my voice in this way. And then I think the other thing is, yes, it's a public health, it's a public dangerous situation. And so we're not focusing on the specifics of the diagnosis. I mean, Mary Trump certainly will, because she had firsthand impact on that. But I think the larger issues are more about what this could lead to and has led to in our country.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, without necessarily giving him a diagnosis then, like, what is your conceptualization of what is going on with him?
Yeah. I mean, I read Dr. Mary Trump's book as soon as it came out, and I certainly concur with everything she said. I think she clearly has this really interesting perspective, being both a clinical psychologist as well as having grown up around him. Certainly, I think antisocial personality disorder, aka sociopathy, fits for him because all the chronic lying, the disregard for social norms, the manipulation of people as like transactions and what you'll get from somebody rather than being able to have a human connection, and a lack of empathy and conscience. I mean, that fits, I think, in terms of also what we know about criminals and people who are, in prison. That kind of diagnosis fits. And also with like white collar, crime, in terms of people who are doing things like insider trading and other unscrupulous things. So like, if he was just a businessman in New York, like he was for many years, so be it, right? There's lots of people who are in business who are unethical, who lie, who cheat, all those types of things. But the fact that he's the president of the United States of America
Mm-hmm.
changes everything.
Yeah. So this will be interesting to get into because I actually don't think he's a sociopath. The way that I'm framing it is that, in my understanding, sociopaths know the difference between right and wrong and essentially somehow delight in the fact that they're doing wrong. My conceptualization, and especially after reading the book, was that he thinks this is confabulation. He thinks that he's telling the truth. He believes everything. And I put that in the category of more narcissism because a narcissist has to convince themselves of their rightness and live in that space.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, what Mary Trump pointed out as well is like, he's complicated. There's certainly a case for antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, probably some learning disorder issues, because if you look at, times when he was interviewed earlier in life, like he was more coherent and more able to have some articulation. So regardless of the diagnostic picture, it is a picture of dangerousness.
Right. I guess too, I almost think it's worse because the way that I've been conceptualizing him is that everything that he says and does is almost an accident, except that I think his handlers, I think he's an idiot. And the book actually confirmed that for me too, that he doesn't know what he's doing, and the people around him know how to get him to do the thing that they want him to do in order to service their agenda.
Yeah, I mean, he, from an early age, like it was pretty clear he was not that gifted or that bright. So, his family groomed him as the golden child of the golden son to be walking in his father's footsteps. But he really didn't have much talent or giftedness to be able to do that, which I think contributes to his, defensiveness and his inability to take any feedback, take any criticism, say, I'm sorry, all those human skills that, we miss in terms of how gifted Obama was with those skills. So yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
Well, and it sounded like, so in reading the book, it sounds like, so his father, Fred Trump, wanted Freddie, the oldest son, which is Mary Trump's father, wanted him to be his successor. And it sounded like he really wanted to, what's the word I'm looking for? Have some autonomy and be his own person and, be a pilot and these sort of things. And that was an insult essentially to Fred. And then he took Donald's, desire for approval from him and manipulated that to get him to step into this role, and then would praise him for the negative behavior that we're now seeing as president. So not only can he not take feedback, like the fact that he couldn't take feedback was one of the things that I think Fred liked, because he would just let everything roll off his back, right? And in the book too, it sounded like Donald had some things that Fred didn't have. And so it was all in service. Like in NARM, we talk a lot about narcissists only being able to see other people as objects, right? Like you said that before in terms of antisocial. And so Donald literally just being an object to then further like Fred's own narcissistic fantasies.
Yes. Think about the narcissistic parent. They see their children as extensions of themselves only, right? Not as like separate humans with their own needs and their own wants and desires and gifts and all that. So I think you're right when Freddie said, no, I'm not, I don't want to go into the Trump business. I want to be a pilot. That was a huge narcissistic injury for Fred Trump. He was like that, that was not acceptable. And that part of the story is actually really tragic. How Freddie Trump struggled in life and developed alcoholism and had all sorts of things from that. So yes, I think, Donald was the one, okay, Freddie's not interested in going with the family business. We're seeing Donald, we're seeing that he could shape him. And Donald had some kind of disturbing qualities from a young age, like bullying people and doing some rather unsavory qualities. And I think Fred saw that and said, you know what, I could work with that.
Right. And yes. And again, they were like, those skills were cultivated.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you from, being a trauma therapist, I had a moment where when I was reading the book and I thought, if he was just this New York businessman, I would have a lot of empathy for what he experienced as a child. I mean, Donald was 2 years old. His mom became deathly ill. They didn't think she was going to survive. She survived and apparently was had chronic health issues and was very like emotionally absent
Cold. Yeah.
because of her own issues. It sounds like some untreated psychiatric issues as
Mm-hmm.
well. And then Fred Trump was the denial positive thinker. He was really into the like power of positive
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and he just continued to work for 70 hours a week, knowing these four kids were just parenting themselves. And so, 2-year-old needing so many like attunement and soothing and comforting and warmth and love and all that, I just got cut off at that point. So, Mary talks about in the book developmentally feeling like Donald is still that 3-year-old now in terms of his psychological abilities and functioning, and that fits.
Right. Especially with the tantrums and
Mhm.
the language that he uses, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's funny that you bring up empathy because that was something that I was going to ask you about, right? I feel like as therapists, it's our job essentially to assume empathy, right? And then like find
Mhm.
the reasons for it. And this is so complicated because I feel like America is in an abusive relationship right now. And obviously he's the perpetrator. And
Absolutely.
so
Mhm.
as the recipient of that abuse, if I empathize with him right now, I'm continuing to put myself in danger,
Yes,
right? So I'm
absolutely.
curious the way that you frame it.
Yeah, I've worked with clients who have said exactly that. We're, as a country, in this relationship with an abusive parent. Think about like, okay, so I mean, generally, the president is sort of the parent of the country, right? And
Mm-hmm,
they,
mm-hmm.
all of the trickle down from that, whether that's warmth and understanding of science and listening to experts and being humble and
Mm-hmm.
all those qualities, or being divisive and separating us into our political parties, not having, any understanding or even pretending to want to understand people and their needs. That has a huge impact. And I think coming back to what we talked about earlier with the safety, that is the safety that we're not feeling right now, because we have this person in charge that continues to make really dangerous, outlandish claims and behaves in a way that's completely unpredictable. And we're set, feeling really scared, like these, scared children that are in homes. I mean, think about like, as therapists, if we have clients who are actively in an abusive relationship, let's say emotionally abusive relationship, and choosing to stay for whatever reason, right? What can we do? We can like build them up, we can offer support, we can offer education and understanding and perspective taking and help them, hopefully get out of that relationship. But there's not a lot of work we can do beyond that
Mm-hmm.
until they've chosen to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's the helpless feeling that we're all feeling right now is okay, we can cope, we can stay in the moment, we can, work on the cause, we can do all sorts of things to help ourselves, but it's limited.
Mm-hmm.
It's limited.
And I like the fact that you said an abusive parent because that actually it takes a lot of the agency out of it. And I think that is what we're experiencing right now because those of us who didn't vote for him, we thought we did our part. We thought,
Mhm.
we thought we had this agency and then it felt like it was ripped out from under us. And now, like
Mhm.
where we are in this moment, I mean, we've tried impeachment. There's all sorts of
Yes.
things that people have tried and it's not worked. So it feels more
Mhm.
like we are the abused child because we don't
Mhm.
have the power. And
Right.
I mean, part of the reason I'm doing this episode is because I want to appeal to anybody who thinks that their vote isn't going to count or it's not important to
Mm.
go out and vote. I really, really
Yes.
want to encourage that because I think, not only Trump aside, I think this is a wake up call for our country in terms of
Mhm.
how do we want our democracy to really work? How do we want to show up for that? How do we get engaged and how do we see ourselves in the political spectrum in a way that supports our mental health and supports
Mhm.
care and concern for those around us?
There's so many examples, right? I mean, look at systemic racism, structural issues. Like, we can support individuals, but if we don't look at those bigger systems that are problematic, we can only do so much, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
so frustrating and helpless feeling. And I totally, I mean, absolutely. We have tried the Mueller report. We have impeached
Mm-hmm.
him through the House. Like, we've done so many things to try to, and unfortunately, our checks and our balances have failed. And that's problematic in itself. And
Right.
I truly believe that this might be the last chance we have at saving our democracy.
Literally.
Yeah. I went to the Holocaust Museum in Skokie on Sunday.
We're going this weekend.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
the RBG exhibit is awesome.
Yep.
You'll love it. But
Mm-hmm.
also, have you been there before?
No.
Okay. Take some time and go through the main exhibit. My partner is Jewish, and he's like, "You've never been here before. Let's just go through." And I was sort of resistant because it was heavy, and it is heavy. But it is also quite concerning to see the parallels of Nazi Germany and America in 2020. And so I strongly believe that every single person, who has a vote, needs to exercise our constitutional right and get out there and vote, because that's going to be immensely important.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And I guess too, also to just name the fact that our checks and balances have failed is terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. My fervent wish and hope is that Biden wins the election and that we have an opportunity in 2021 to make some real changes and to start thinking more about the people in this country and how to support them and offer respect and also like real concrete ways of showing that. And that's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's so vital that we can see this as an opportunity, because I think before any major change happens, like there is violence, there is revolt, there is revolution. It's not something that you look back in history and you kind of have a paragraph about a period of time, but I think living through it is pretty awful. And I think that's what we're sitting with right now. The awfulness of the unknown and the uncertainty of seeing so many things that are just very hit us on a moral level of being not right, and seeing that there's a good majority of our people in our country that still support him and think he's doing this great job.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I just want to note too, because on the podcast, we tend to look at things from a spiritual perspective. And when you talk of revolution and there can't be change until there's revolt and revolution, from a spiritual perspective, we can't have rebirth until there's death. And that, unfortunately, is literally what's happening right now in so many ways. And literally systems and things are being burnt to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope is, because I think we Democrats, when we elected Obama, we just patted ourselves on the back. Like, look what we did. We elected a black man. How great we are in this post-racial society. And we were blind to the simmering rage happening underneath that now has come to a head. So I'm just hopeful that we hold Biden's feet to the fire, and that motherfucker he's gonna have the hardest job, I think, of anyone if he gets into this presidency, because he's gonna have to prove himself to the people who didn't vote for him, and he's gonna have to do the shit that we want, the people who did vote him in, and make a lot of fucking changes.
Well, and I'm heartened to know like he's establishing this team of Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren and other like really smart people, because he's going to need all of them backing and trying to figure out how to navigate this mess. And okay, let's say you're hiking, you're in the woods and there's a boulder and you like unearth the boulder and it's like all the nasty, creepy crawly, bugs and all sorts of stuff, right? They come out and they're right there. And that's what I feel like Obama, we had the boulder down. It was still all there. And now with Trump, it's ripped it open. It's right here. We
Such a great analogy. And
we can't deny it. And, I think one thing back to why I wanted to come out with my voice and try to make, my words known in support of this cause was like, we can't be silent anymore. Silence is complicit.
It's killing people.
But also it is literally killing people. So you will see at the Holocaust Museum, there is a quote by Elie Wiesel, one of my favorite quotes I wrote down. So I wanted to talk about it, or at least mention it, was, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." And so speaking our truth and speaking about how not okay and not normal all of this is so powerful. And that's going to help people see this as the reality and see the skewed reality and be able to help them, I hope, propel and understand that for themselves, right? We can't just be nice. Like Democrats, we want to be nice. We're working with Republicans. We want to be supportive and compromising and all that. We can't do that right now.
Right, right. Well, I joined this class called Decolonizing Therapy for Black folks. And the woman who runs that class, Shauna Marie Brown, she said today, there's a difference between being polite and being kind. And we, especially in the mental health community, we've been polite, right? We have thought we're not supposed to be political. We're not supposed to let our clients, A, know who we are, B, let them know our political stance. And that when we put, I think because what I've determined in terms of like racism is like, if we keep it political and I'm not supposed to talk about politics, then I'm not allowed to talk about it. That's why for me, like racism is taken out of the political arena. And I'm like, I'm just fucking talking about it. This is a reckoning. There's so many reckonings right now for our democracy, for our environmental causes, for the psychological industries and the medical industry, like everything is being reckoned.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't politics. This is human rights. This is how do we, as a society, want to function? Do we want to bow down to corporations and wealth and power? And do we want to really look at how we can try to put some policies in place that support humans that are suffering?
Right.
Humans that, need help. And how do we see that as more psychologically safe and beneficial to everybody?
Right, right. And I'm just curious, like how things are going to shift, because especially in terms of we being therapists right now, our biggest concern, I remember having this talk with the Badass group, is will insurance continue to cover telehealth? Because we're in COVID right now, right? And so that's a really very concrete, specific thing that we can show how the insurance companies control access to care, because maybe they'll stop covering phone at some point, and then the people who don't have internet access or the people who are in domestic violence relationships and have to walk and talk their therapy are going to be like kicked out of this, right? That's another thing I really want people to hear when we talk about these issues, is that this is about access. Who has the luxury, who has the privilege to get these things?
Yeah, I remember we were all just terrified as business owners. We're like, what is going to happen? What are we going to do with our clients? Are we switched to like completely pro bono work because they need our continued help? And how do we manage this? And, there was so much pushback in the past around telehealth, and, it's been so effective. For some people, it's been amazingly helpful. And some of my clients, like long-term clients, are like, I can't believe this. Like I have people who are really scheduled and busy, and she's like, I don't have to like drive to your office, and I enjoy just being, in my home or my office, and having that comfort and that privacy really works for me. And so I think there will be some bright parts of figuring out, like maybe the telehealth question might have been more like 10 years down the road, and now it's right now.
It's now.
We're in it. It is happening. It is not happening. And we're forced to figure out and seeing like, wow, it's working. I do like to come back to thinking a little bit more about some lessons and some hope from the Trump presidency. The mobilization of women in politics. I mean, you were right. We were so complacent under Obama. We were like, Obama is the parent everyone wants to have, that's cool and thoughtful and takes care of us and supportive and all that. So women have been mobilized in politics for like in numbers that have been unheard of until now. And, we now know what happens when our democratic process does not work. And we know very clearly about how to really look at qualifications and experience, and, not somebody who is just completely selling something. I mean, he was trying to sell himself in the presidency.
Himself.
Yes. Right?
Yeah, he is the brand.
Right. And some of us didn't know that. Some of us didn't realize that. And I think there has been some brainwashing and some other sophisticated techniques that have been used. And for any of your listeners out there who supported him and are questioning that, I want to say, I think we have a right and a responsibility to talk with you with kindness and support you and bring you into an understanding. And I'm personally dedicated to that as well. I think it's not about red versus blue. It's not about Republican versus Democratic. It really is about American ideals and democracy. And can we come back to that sense of being united? I think with COVID, I think one of most heartbreaking things was we really thought this is something that's impacting all of us. Can we unite around this and use the science and experts to help that? Clearly, we did not. Clearly, there's going to be major books and all sorts of things around how massive of a failure the COVID crisis was in our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was due to leadership that was not concerned about the bigger picture and everybody that was impacted. It was really icky and really disturbing to see that play out.
Really disturbing. And I just wanted to note too, because you said come back to our democracy and our roots. And I know you'll agree with this sentiment, but essentially, I think what's being exposed right now is how actually the democracy was set up to privilege white men, right? And like a lot of that is coming unraveled.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, shit, the founding fathers didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They were just like, flying on the seat of their coat string, whatever that phrase is, whatever, flying by the seat of their pants, trying to figure this shit out. So good job. You did it as much as you could. But I think now, as the country has grown and has aged, right? We were a little baby country back then, and now we're a teenage country. And so we're trying to figure out who it is that we are. And it's changed over time. Our needs have changed. And I think we're going to have to change what democracy is, because the democracy that I think some people are like, because people red and blue are using the word democracy and meaning two different things. We have to get clear on what it actually is.
Yeah, I think, when I use that word, I'm thinking more the ideals of a democratic society. And I agree, think about like, we're business owners, and what we talk about in our group is how much we've learned and grown from when we first started off to where we are now.
God.
And, how much we have to develop and change and be, humbling, learning experience and learning through failures. And if we don't do that, we're stagnant and stuck and not growing. And so our nation has not grown.
Right.
And like being able to match this new, what does democracy mean and how do we make it inclusive and not just talk, but actually make structures and things in place where we're working towards knocking down some of those things that don't work. And our country was formed by slave owners, and our country was formed by people that, were sort of reactive and getting away from Britain's rule. But, we the people need to figure out ways to keep our members of Congress, hold them accountable to figuring that out.
Right.
And it's, it's very messy now with all the money and the power and the interests and different things that are coloring this right now.
Right. Right. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour, and I know you are just as busy as I am. So I wanted to, before we wrap up here, if you have specific organizations that you really believe in, or any tips for people if they want to take action, because right now is the time to do it.
Yes, absolutely. I would say if you are progressive American, we need to act. There's Postcard to Swing States, there's Indivisible, there's other local organizations needing and wanting volunteers. There's actually, from the Democratic, the DNC, being able to call people, text people, there's a lot of different ways to get involved. And I do think we can take that indignant feeling and propel that with action. And that's helpful. In terms of the Dangerous Case of Donald Trump is a book that's still available. It is a hard read. I'm not going to lie about that. There's also an offshoot organization called the World Mental Health Coalition that was started by Dr. Psy.D Lee to talk more about these issues and get people activated, and hopefully doing some things with Congress as well. So I think those are kind of the two political things I'm thinking about. I think what I've told my clients, and I'm reminding myself, is until the election, and I think afterwards, because I don't think, unfortunately, we will probably know who will be the next president for quite some time. Until that time, we kind of need to take a loop, tie it, hang on to it, and ground ourselves. And know it is going to be a very difficult couple months. Acknowledge that. It is what it is. It's like, we wish we don't have to walk through it, right? We wish we could just press the fast forward button and be in, I don't know, March or April of next year and know when will COVID go away, who will be our next president, what will happen to our racial injustice things, all that. We can't do that. We have to figure out a way to continue functioning and tolerate all this uncertainty and all this anxiety. And it's not easy, right? So I just want to say that really clearly. I don't think, I would say most people who are progressive or who are concerned about what's happening and seeing it directly are not doing well. Our mental health
Right.
collectively are suffering. And so, yeah, doing things like being able to propel into actions, but also continuing to stay in the moment, immerse yourself in something that you enjoy or love, even if you feel like it's a distraction temporarily. So what? It's good. It's good to still have things that bring us joy and people in our lives that we can connect with. But we need some release so we don't have that frustration that just kind of eats away at us. So propelling that through election activities or exercise or other ways to get our voices heard.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
So yes, they can find me on Twitter. It's my old name at Jennifer Panning. My website, my professional website is evanstonpsychologist.com. We are on Instagram at Mindful Psychology Evanston. We're also on Facebook, Mindful Psychology Associates in Evanston. So yes, I'd be happy to chat with anybody. And obviously, therapy is so helpful right now for anybody out there who is just needing support. And I encourage people, you know what, you can ask a potential therapist about their political orientation right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
People can say, hey, this is something I'm really personally struggling with. Are you in line with me? And are you willing and able to sit with me through that? I've had a couple of clients seek me out because of my participation in the book. And I'm like, absolutely. It's really important, I think, to know that the people that we get support from are going to be able to be in it with us.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. I knew this
you.
conversation would be awesome, and I'm just really appreciative of you.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you asked me to do this. It's always great to talk to you. Having a good excuse to talk with you for an hour. And everyone just hang in there.
Hang in there, folks. Thanks so much to Jennifer for joining me today. And thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. To find more information about Jennifer or The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, please go to www.headhearttherapy.com/podcast. And don't forget to vote. Thank you. Until next time. Bye-bye.